All right, today we're talking about how the healthcare industry is evolving and changing, and especially being impacted by all the changes that are happening in AI. My guest today is Zak Eisenberg. He's with Merritt Healthcare, and I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I'm the host of this show. You know, every week we have smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. And if you check out the archives, we've got Netflix, Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, lots of great episodes for you to check out. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast. You're the easy button for any company to launch and run a podcast. So if you want to learn more about that, you can go to rise25.com or email our team at support@rise25.com. All right, my guest today is Zak Eisenberg. He's a partner at Merritt Healthcare Advisors. It's one of the nation's leading healthcare-focused investment banks. So he really has his finger on the pulse of what's going on in healthcare today, which everyone, we all have to deal with it. So we all are curious about what's happening, especially how it's being affected by the changes in AI. And he specializes in advising physician-owned surgery centers, hospitals, and practices on mergers, acquisitions, and strategic partnerships. And he has a background in economics and international relations from Boston University, and prior to Merritt had worked in venture capital and private equity. So he's got quite a lot of background in this area. And Zak, I'm really excited to get into this topic with you because it's an area that I'm curious about. And let's start with you actually had started an edtech company while you were in college. Classic starting a company in your dorm room kind of situation. And it was preparing Chinese students to come to study in the US during college. I'm curious, where did that idea come from? What inspired that?
Well, first of all, John, thanks for having me on the podcast. I know we took a little while to make this happen, but glad to have you and hope you can come on Merritt's podcast at some point. I started that company in college with my roommate, which I guess is kind of a classic story. At the time he was actually from China, and at the time, the number of Chinese students coming to study in the U.S. was growing by, 30 or 35% a year, and they were spending enormous amounts of money studying up on what it was like to get educated here in the U.S. because American education globally still, and especially then in China, had an ambiance of real excellence. And so Chinese students, yes, they can go to Fudan University or Tsinghua or wherever else, but a lot of them wanted to go to Harvard or Boston University or NYU or UCLA. Really internationally focused schools that have a good brand abroad. And they spent enormous amounts of money working with Chinese students who had spent some time here on being educated, what it was like to be here. And so they would take very expensive, air travel to come to the U.S. And it wasn't very attainable for most Chinese students. So we wanted to flip that on its head and bring it to China through technology. This was really when YouTube was starting to really grow. edX and Coursera and a lot of these, educational video sites were up and running.
And this is the early 2010s time frame, 2011, 2012, that kind of time period.
Those companies were. The technology wasn't quite there yet. It was still extremely expensive to run that type of company. We sort of molded a company that did that as well as had in-person training events, but in China. So we would actually bring Americans to China to deliver the same service. We just could serve many more students, and it was a lot more affordable because instead of, several hundred students coming here and paying for flights, et cetera, we just sent 10 people and we could meet with all those people there. It was very successful.
And it would be like a day-long training, or was like a day-long training or something like that?
It was multi-day conferences in a bunch of cities, basically.
Oh, wow. Okay.
With training courses. And then there was a follow-up website where we had a bunch of content and videos and stuff like that. And it went pretty well for a while, and eventually it was time to exit that company. Like I said, there were some real headwinds there that made it challenging to scale the way that we wanted.
What were those headwinds that you ran into?
Well, one of them was the Chinese government.
Okay. Oh, that
Operating in
minor
China,
detail.
yeah, operating in China can be a little challenging, and at the time they were still a little skeptical of Americans operating there. Even though my partner was Chinese, there was some pushback on that. Um,
You ever have any tense moments where they like stopped you at the airport kind of thing, like those types of stories, or prevented you from putting
no,
on the
but
yeah.
local party officials came to
Uh,
the conferences, the Department of Education party officials, and it was a warm reception. But again, they were watching.
yeah.
Beyond that, it was difficult for us to really make a profit. The economics were such that for staff who was here, Americans, it was tough to make this system work over the long term if we couldn't scale the tech side, which we weren't really able to do effectively. So after 5 years, we exited, and yeah, for me, it was mostly uh, an awesome experience and kind of an opening into this new world of finance. And I had raised some capital for the startup, so I got exposed to venture capital and deal making, and found that really interesting. And when it was time to walk away from that company, um, I I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do at that point. So venture capital seemed like a great option. Finance in many ways is a great place to really learn about business generally and get exposed to a bunch of people who are super smart and doing cool things and starting companies. And yeah, that's where I ended up after that startup.
So you end up in venture capital. You'd raised money before. What was it like going into like kind of flipping sides from being at a startup where you had raised money to being in the world of VC and learning about that?
Well, it was hard also because I didn't study business or anything in college. I actually started school as an acting major, and made my way into some other spaces like economics, et cetera. But um, yeah, the hardest thing was I get really passionate about operations because I had started this company, and I always wanted to operate these businesses that I thought were good investments. But that's not really the role of
Yeah, VC.
good VC.
Yeah.
Yeah. So putting on that advisor hat took me a few years to kind of, really get in the mindset of instead of doing it. Um, and yeah, that first one was my first exposure really to healthcare in a big way. It was biotech life science, and not um, kind of how, everyday exposure to healthcare is comes about where you're going to a doctor's office. It was sort of, PhDs working on their bench, working on some crazy new pharmaceutical or biotech device, pretty
Right.
fun. Um, but yeah, that was an interesting experience, and it got me involved in sort of high finance as well, deal making and doing transactions, which has been fun too.
And what drew you to healthcare? How did you go from ed tech to being interested in healthcare? Was there a particular, transaction? Was there a particular client or something, anything like that sparked your interest?
Yeah, I'd like to say that it was super purposeful, but the honest answer is that my now wife, my girlfriend at the time, was living in New Orleans, and after I exited my company, I went down there to live with her, and gave myself 6 months to get a VC job or a job at a startup
Get a VC
in
job
in
in
the
New
city.
Orleans?
In New Orleans, exactly,
Okay.
which
Okay.
was
So,
challenging.
I
And
I live in the San
and
Francisco
so
Bay Area, and
yeah,
literally I went mountain biking yesterday with a friend who's a VC. Lots of VCs around here. I haven't heard about a lot of venture capital in New Orleans.
there aren't. I
Yeah.
think the fund I ended up at was one of like three in the
Wow.
city.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
there's actually it's interesting. New Orleans actually has an extremely active angel community. It has the biggest angel network in the country.
Oh, wow.
If you're
Okay.
familiar with angel networks, it has
Yeah.
like 300 members.
Yeah.
So super active, lots of
Hmm.
money in New Orleans, obviously. But yeah, it was a little challenging, thus the 6 months.
Yeah.
But yeah, eventually landed this spot, and yeah, it was a ton of fun.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's almost like you give yourself like the world's hardest challenge. I'm going to go to New Orleans and I'm going to, join a venture capital firm and be like, I don't know,
Well,
going
in my
to,
defense,
Minnesota and be like, I want a job in federal government in politics or something like that, like completely like different industry.
well, John, in my defense, New Orleans is a lot of fun. And
True.
also, I was very motivated because I wanted to live with my girlfriend.
That's
And
true.
it worked
Yes.
out
Yep.
because we're married now. So
Yep.
I
Yeah.
think it was a good call. But
Yeah. It's
look, if it
interesting. Like
hadn't
that.
worked out,
It's
I
almost
would
like,
have been in New York and San Francisco,
right.
one of those two.
It's almost like someone needs to take that angel network and put together a VC fund, like for all the active angels there.
That's a great idea. I think I'll
Yeah.
have to follow up on that one.
Yeah. Nevertheless, so you find your way eventually. Let's take it to modern day. So I don't think I got the answer on the healthcare piece. So was the VC fund that you joined in New Orleans was focused on healthcare there?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's it. It was maybe 60% biotech life science focused. Actually, when I left New Orleans and went to New York and went into growth equity and private equity and spent a few years doing that, I was not in healthcare. I was just interested in exploring other spaces. But, healthcare was always something I was sort of drawn to. I thought about being a doctor at some point, and my mom is an acupuncturist, so healthcare was kind of always around my life a little bit. But yeah, I wasn't particularly seeking it. It was more like this was one of the three funds, and I was able to get that
Right,
position.
right. And now
Yeah.
you've been with so Merritt Healthcare Advisors is focused 100% on healthcare in the M&A space. You've been there for almost the whole time. It's about 10 years old. So talk to me a little about like the early days of Merritt and what some of the challenges were to break into having an advisory in that space, because it's kind of the industry that you're in. Like, there's lots of players that have been around for a long time, so that must be hard to break into.
Yeah, it is. It is. And really, we had to, and we still have a differentiated message. It's how we've been able to break in and this sounds odd, I'm sure, to your listeners as well, who, many of whom I'm sure are entrepreneurs. 10 years is not that long in investment banking when most of the banks out there are, 100 years old.
Yeah.
It's difficult often to compete with those with brands that age. But um, what makes us quite different is that I'm not unique as a partner in terms of background. Most people on the team, really at the senior level as well as junior people, have operational experience. Most of us within healthcare. So I am different in that way, and that my operational experience is not healthcare driven. But it's really what attracted me to join the firm in the first place. The brothers who started the firm are serial healthcare entrepreneurs, and I know coming from education, which is a fairly regulated space, that healthcare must be even more challenging. At least that's what I thought at the time. And it's true. It's an extremely difficult space to operate in because it's so regulated
Mm.
by each market within the US and also globally. It's quite differentiated depending on where you are. And I thought that was pretty impressive that they had been so successful in a difficult space like this. Not being physicians either. Both of them are, operators only. Um, so that's really our pitch to the market, and it's really why I think we've been so successful is that when we're speaking with mainly physician entrepreneurs, because that's who most of the entrepreneurs in healthcare are. They're usually physicians or PhDs or something like this as background, but you have operators as well, business people. Um, when we go through our background of having operational backgrounds inside and outside of healthcare and having been investors in the space for a long time, that really strikes a chord with people. And it really goes to our ethos, which is to be an investment bank by founders for founders, by operators for operators.
Mhm.
So we think that's what has made us so successful and able to break into the space as quickly as we have.
I'm curious. So, with a background in operations, you can naturally be gravitated towards that, towards operations. And when you have companies that you're advising, is that a tension sometimes? Like how involved you should get with helping them with operations, how to figure out what your advisory role is, and where you draw the line, or where you stop and they have to take over.
Yeah, we think of ourselves really as ad hoc board members. So many of the best board members, in my opinion, usually have an operational background where they can offer uh, sort of objective advice from the outside looking in. And that's what we're able to do for their operations, as well as help them run whatever transaction process they want, which is our core business. For me, the way I get my operational scratch these days is that when I joined Merritt, there were three people, and now we're growing. So Merritt is I wouldn't call it a startup, but an early stage company still, and we're still trying to grow. So that's how I um, at least on my end, still get excitement from participating in operations. But yeah, it's a balance. It's a balance. And especially because our clients know that we have that operational background, they're usually asking us more questions, strategic questions about how they can operate their business, if we know vendors or if we can help them with certain things. And we need to be pretty careful about how we set expectations up front with
Hmm.
clients.
Tell me about, we're recording this in 2026 here. There's been so much changes over the last 10 years in the healthcare space. Um, what do you have your eye on right now? For a layman who's listening to this, who goes to the doctor and, has their own, relationship with their insurance carrier, what are some of the changes that you're noting, or the kind of macroeconomic, influences that are affecting the industry? And I know that is a super broad question, so take it whatever direction you want with it.
Yeah, it is very broad. I let me put the AI topic to the side
Yeah,
for
we could get
a
to that
moment.
second. Yeah, after this.
Yeah, because of course that's going to impact healthcare as well, and it's starting to. When you think about what's happening in healthcare, I think it's important to not just think about what's happening to healthcare only in the US, because it's a global phenomenon. Developed countries overall have a few similar trends. Their birth rates are going down, and their population is aging demographically. This is true across economies. And so they actually have very similar problems in healthcare, in that as populations age, they need more treatment, more healthcare. And as birth rates decline, the share of younger patients um, uh, from a health system perspective, whether it's government insurance or private insurance like we have in the US, or a combination like we have in the US, um, younger sets of the population offset risk from older sets of the population. So
Yeah.
if you're thinking about it from an insurance perspective, this is a big driver of what is happening in healthcare, because here in the US, the silver tsunami is happening. The boomer generation, which is still the largest generation, I think millennials are a close second, but there are more boomers than there are millennials. Um, and the first boomer, I think, just turned 80. So this is starting to really happen. We're in the
Mhm.
midst of this. And over the next 10 to 20 years, this will be the defining feature of US healthcare, is that we have this huge cohort of
Mhm.
boomer generation people who we need to take care of, and it will be expensive. Um, and that will affect private companies as well as Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. Um, Combined with that, and this is, again, not just unique to the US, there is a trend to try and deliver care at the lowest cost site of service possible. Now in the US, we've had a system of treating patients for a long time. We had a system where we were treating patients for everything in a hospital. You scraped your knee, you go to the hospital. You need heart surgery, you go to the hospital. You need an X-ray taken, you go to the hospital. This is hugely inefficient. Hospitals are very inefficient. They're very expensive to run. They're very large. So it's a lot of facility and there are a lot of people and costs associated with that. Um, what's happened in the US, and I'm sure, again, most people can relate to this, is probably, certainly over our lifetimes, John, most of the care that you now receive is what's called outpatient, which means that you're seeing, even for some complex procedures, you're seeing your doctor outside of a hospital. So
Mhm.
for surgeries, for example, most surgeries now can be done in an outpatient setting called an ambulatory surgery center. This has been the biggest trend over the last 2.5 decades on the surgical side. It's why my partner's business really has been as successful as it has, developing close to 4 dozen facilities now, is because hospitals have been pressured partially to move patients from the very expensive hospital OR to this less expensive outpatient OR. Um, so I'd say those are the two very large sort of demographic and operational trends that people in the industry pay attention to. The last one is population health, which I think is going to be accelerated through AI and better data. But this is the idea that other countries, frankly, are a little better at than we are, which is preventing disease as opposed to treating disease, really as a way to improve people's lives, number one, of course, and then secondarily to reduce the cost of the overall wellness system in a country. So in many European countries, they consider, education and food as part of wellness
Mm.
and their wellness budget. Here in the US, we spend roughly the same amount as our European counterparts, but we spend a lot more on healthcare than we do on other aspects of this sort of wellness
Mm.
ecosystem.
It seems like attitudes have changed towards that, but it just the economics haven't.
They're starting to. The
Mm.
economics are starting to.
Or
There's
maybe it's just because I live in, I don't know, Northern California, a place that people talk about preventative care and they talk about wellness and things like that. Maybe I'm more aware of it because of that.
Yeah, I think where you are, actually, Kaiser, which is a huge operator in your area of the country, has been at the forefront of this change for a long time, where because they're also an insurance company, so they insure patients as well. They're able to really manage risk and spend across the entire continuum and optimize for health outcomes and low cost,
Yeah.
because that's ultimately what we all want. And in the US, it's necessary. It might be the single biggest issue of our generation for our budget is making sure our country doesn't go bankrupt from runaway healthcare spending,
Right.
which has been a huge political topic, but it is just an economic reality that
Yeah.
it's continued to eat our economy.
Um, let's talk about you. We were talking beforehand, before the recording, and you said you had a cardiovascular business that you represented, and you took them to market, meaning helped them to go out to either raise funds or to be sold. And we were talking about that this was kind of illustrative of some of the challenges of in healthcare of businesses that want to scale or things along those lines. Could you take us through that case study?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Not your, um, I'd say, fairy tale transaction. Lots of founders, I think, and operators expect that when they go to sell their company or raise capital, they're going to have a fairly easy time doing it and kind of go out to market and they'll have a bunch of suitors and they'll close with the first one they pick. That happens sometimes, especially if you're smaller and you're more of an add-on size, meaning you're selling to an existing platform. If you're a little bit larger, sometimes you run into issues, which is what happened with this client. So they were sort of at a size where they could be a platform, they could also be a regional extension. So as a physician cardiovascular practice, they had some surgical service lines and some different facilities, imaging, et cetera, testing. So pretty sophisticated business. And the first buyer they went into diligence with, who was a great fit culturally, just couldn't close out the round. As a financial sponsor, they needed to raise some debt capital to fill out the round, and they just weren't able to get it done. Not because they didn't want a partner or client didn't want a partner, it just didn't happen, and that set us back 4 months. And also, sometimes when you go out to market and then you end up not actually completing the first deal you had signed, sometimes there can be a little bit of a taint on the business.
Mm,
And people start asking questions. Oh, why didn't that
right.
close?
Even if it has
Um,
nothing to do with the business itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this started to happen a little bit here, but thankfully this client had really stayed on top of operations, which can be challenging when you're trying to
Yeah.
sell a business or raise capital. I'm sure, again, any of your listeners who are operators or executives or founders relate to this. It's very difficult to run your business while you're raising capital because
Yeah.
it's a full-time job. That's why investment bankers as a industry exist, because
Yeah.
it takes a lot of time do this. And it's true for M&A as well, probably even more time. Um, so we ended up finding another partner. It actually became more of a merger of equals. It was a platform company that I ended up partnering with this client. They had a pre-existing platform, and um, he ended up being the chief medical officer of that platform, and they were relatively a similar size, so it ended up being a great fit. But from start to finish, from the time we engaged with him, it took almost 20 months. That's a
Wow.
long time.
Wow.
Um,
So you as
yeah,
a
so
as a professional need to be patient and also need to manage the client's expectations.
yeah, I'd say more than half the job is therapy. Um, Therapy and counseling,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you can call it what you want, but I'm
Right.
sure you had this experience too as an attorney. Counseling comes in many forms.
Right.
And
You're truly a
yeah,
counselor, like you're counseling them. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, advising,
Yeah.
however you want to put it. But it's why we think of ourselves really as ad hoc board members, is we're a very trusted board member who helps with
Yeah.
operations. We're helping with this process strategically, et cetera. And we've
Uh,
been in their shoes too, which is different.
I'm mindful of the clock because we're a little short on time. So AI, let's cover that in like 60 seconds, right? So like, how's AI affecting the healthcare industry?
Um, Yeah, like everywhere else, it kind of started impacting healthcare mostly through chatbots and some sort of written architecture. So scribing for physicians has been
Mm,
a big area.
yeah. I've noticed a lot more of that
Questions.
recently. Yeah.
Yeah, which is great for providers because note taking is a huge part of providers' days. It also leads to lots of burnout, just
Yeah.
the amount of documentation. And scribing, the better and more accurate it gets, the more impact that will have on
Yeah.
providers, which is good for all of us because
Yeah.
we need the providers. And secondarily, really what I'm excited about is over the next, I think it'll take longer than most people think, but let's say over the next decade, I would hope to see regulations loosened so that these AI systems can start to actually diagnose and provide care in some ways to patients. There are already studies, for example, with radiology. So, your
I've heard
radiologist reads
this.
an
Yeah.
MRI, et
Yeah.
cetera. Several years ago from Google, they did a study. This is before ChatGPT. The systems at that point were already better than your
Wow.
best panel of radiologists.
Wow.
Now, the issue is that, of course, there's a huge status quo. Do you really want an AI system doing absolutely everything. No, probably it'll be a human in the loop, but
Yeah.
not to pick on radiologists, but I think that is a profession that will need to change dramatically for radiologists to have a place in the future because the skill set of reading images is not going to have nearly as much value. And also, patients will not want that, especially if the accuracy of the AI system is
Right.
better. So I'm very excited about that. You're starting to see this a little bit in, especially in the imaging sphere, where it's not necessarily diagnosing, but there are intraoperative cameras now which can identify potential cancerous cells while the patient is under, which is very exciting. I know of one in the GI space. So when someone's getting an endoscopy or colonoscopy or something, this system is telling the doctor, "Hey, you might want to look at this. You might want to
Mm,
take
mm,
a sample of this or that,
mm.
whatever they're seeing in the image,"
Amazing.
which is very exciting because
Yeah.
that improves patient care.
Yeah.
It'll reduce complications and improve outcomes for people, which is ultimately what it's all about. I think there's also a lot of movement on kind of the business service side, which is, less specific for healthcare, I would say, because you're seeing it in lots of industries. But think like, collection cycles and accounting and kind of all the back office services that you need, HR functionality. You're seeing that in healthcare too. But for me, I'm really excited about the science and the medicine aspect when we can actually start to see an impact on outcomes for patients.
Yeah, that is really exciting and ultimately what it's all about. So that's really cool to be able to watch that in the years ahead. Well, Zach, this has been great. Where can people go to learn more about you, connect with you, and learn more about Merritt?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, so that's a great place to get in touch with me, or merrittadvisory.com. Email is there. And yeah, thanks for the time today, John. It's a great conversation.
Great. Zach, thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.